Hello, everyone. Welcome to season 2 of the Undiluted Word podcast. I'm so excited to finally be introducing this season to you, and I'm glad that it started because once it starts, it means it must continue and hopefully get to the end of it. And I'm just so excited to share with you so much that I've learned and so much that I'm still learning about faith. This season, as you all are pretty much aware of, is about the hall of faith in our 21st century society. So essentially, this episode is a walk through the hall, just to give you sort of a flavour and introduction into this big topic called faith, and just to let's sort of break the ice and understand what it means, what faith is, and before I start bringing all the other guests along. So I promise this will be the last episode that you just hear my voice alone. Yes, so without further ado, I'll just get straight into it. The key text for this season, or sort of like the inspiration of it, comes from Hebrews chapter 11. And the whole chapter is so beautiful and really just embodies what faith is all about. And so I guess that's where the inspiration for this whole season came from, as Hebrews 11 is well known to be the hall of faith in Christian society. So the key text is Hebrews 11 verse 1, which reads, "Now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen." In all of Christianity, faith is one of three key aspects of Christian life. There's a text that says, faith, hope, and love, and out of these, love is the greatest of them all. I'm not about to describe or explain why love is the greatest of them all, but amongst this special three, we have faith. Faith, I guess, is that word that's thrown around a lot by Christians, and you sort of wonder, what does it have to do with me, in case you might be listening and you're not necessarily a Christian. Faith, by definition, is the complete trust or confidence in someone or something. So by that definition, I can tell that it's not necessarily just only to do with Christians. People that are not Christians can also have a certain type of faith, because it is this trust or confidence in someone or something. For example, on our day-to-day basis and things we do in our lives, I believe everyone exercises some form of faith. To get on a plane, you need to have an element of faith to believe that you will reach your destination. The pilot knows what they're doing, because sometimes you never really see the pilot, but you need to have this sort of trust or confidence that this pilot will get you to your destination, and they have gone through the necessary training and hours flying different forms of aircraft to be able to actually get you to your destination. Similarly, sitting on a chair, right now I'm sat on a chair. This chair, I have faith that the chair will hold me up and I'm not going to fall onto the ground. Essentially, I have faith in the maker of the chair. I don't know who made the chair, but I have faith that the person who engineered the chair knows how my weight or someone else's weight can be held up by this chair, and they're not just going to immediately fall over. I mean, there are times when I've seen people sit on a chair and then it like sort of just crumbles, and that's sad. But essentially, there's still that faith required for you to know you're sitting somewhere and like you're not going to fall over, basically. However, there's also the opposites, times where we do not necessarily exercise faith. I remember a time whilst I was in university, one of my closest friends, you've heard of her before, Panache, in season 1, she gave me this camera protector. And what it essentially is a little, I don't even know how to explain it. It's literally a camera protector. You put it on your webcam on any device you have, such as your laptop, and it stops whoever is sitting behind the camera to see you. Now, this sounds absurd, but the reason why we're doing this is that we don't believe that the manufacturers necessarily have our best interest at heart. And you've seen news of people's images and just random images of people being leaked out into the public. And you wonder, how did these images kind of like get out there? So for ages, I always had this protector over my webcam because I didn't want people to be spying on me. This shows somewhat a lack of faith in the software or the engineers, or I don't know what you want to call it, but like the wider company behind our products that we use on a day-to-day basis. So, as mentioned in the trailer for this season, there are several characters mentioned in the Hebrews Hall of Faith, and I'm going to take this opportunity to share some insights from Hebrews chapter 11 before you start hearing from the special guests that I have in the upcoming episodes. So, I've already said Hebrews 11 verses 1 to you, but I'm going to take this opportunity to just read it again in the Common English Bible translation. It reads, "Faith is the reality of what we hope for, the proof of what we don't see." The proof of what we don't see. Now, human beings are very physical creatures. We heavily rely on our senses, such as taste, seeing, touching, hearing, smelling, because our senses help us make sense of the world around us. But we are told that faith is the evidence of things not seen. To me, this signifies that faith is totally different. It's a totally different type of sense that is needed for us to have an understanding of the invisible sort of spiritual world. So we can't rely on our usual senses such as tasting, feeling, seeing, touching, or like hearing. Faith makes spiritual things tangible. For example, if we take a summer's day, our 5 senses can work together to let us know that it is a summer's day, like a hot summer day. For example, you can maybe taste an ice cream. That's a weird example, but sometimes you can taste an ice cream and so you know, okay, it's hot, it's melting perhaps. Sometimes you can taste the sweat on your skin, which is very gross, I know, but that is a way for you to know that, oh, it's quite hot today. You can see the sun. That is a way for you to also know that it's a hot summer's day. You can see the light, because in the winter you definitely can't see no light, especially here in the UK. You can even see people having fun, going out and about. The place looks busier because it's a hot summer's day. What else? What are the other senses? Touch. You can feel the warmth of the sun on your skin when it's a hot summer's day. If you're at a beach, maybe you can feel the water on your skin. And you can maybe feel that it's very warm. That is also pointing towards this hot summer's day. If you're by the seaside, you can hear laughter. You can hear maybe children running about. You can maybe hear the waves crashing in. All of this will help you paint a picture of this hot summer's day. What more is there? Smell. You can smell. This is not also a yucky example, but you can possibly smell on a bus. I remember when I was in school and I'd get onto a bus filled with lots of other school students and the stench. Yeah? Because you just got all these children who have finished school. Maybe they've had PE lessons throughout that day and now they're all packed onto this bus like a pack of sardines. And the bus just smells so much of like teenage children and their BO. That is also all pointing to the fact that it's a hot summer's day. I hope I've made it very clear how our senses are so important for us to make sense of the world around us. But this is just the physical world. And as we already know, there's a physical world and there's also a spiritual world. Our 5 senses that I've already explained help us make sense of the physical world. But faith is this extra sense that is needed to make sense of this spiritual world. Similarly, faith heightens our understanding of the work and also the nature of God. Moving on to Hebrews chapter 11 verse 2, it says, "The elders in the past were approved because they showed faith. Therefore, this is telling us that we gain God's approval through faith." Allow me to quickly jump to verse 6 of this chapter. "Without faith, it is impossible to please God." I want you to pay attention to the fact that the Bible does not say it is difficult to please God. It says it is impossible. Difficult and impossible are 2 different words. Difficult suggests that something needs much effort or skill to be able to accomplish or deal with it. Impossible implies that it cannot occur, it can't exist, it cannot be done. No matter how hard you try, it is just impossible. So we are reminded it is impossible to please God without faith. I'm sure you're very familiar with the Hollywood Walk of Fame. But if you're not familiar, the Hollywood Walk of Fame is a popular tourist destination in Hollywood in California. As of April 2022, this Walk of Fame has over 2,600 stars, and these hold names of the most successful actors, filmmakers, musicians, whatever type of celebrity in history you name them. They are probably on this Walk of Fame. Another fun fact that I actually came across while I was preparing for this episode is that the stars actually have to pay a fee of about $50,000 to accept their nomination and for them to basically have their star on this Walk of Fame and just basically for the upkeep of this star. Another fun fact that I read was that most of these stars are all on this sort of sidewalk, is just on the ground like a pavement. However, there's one star or celebrity that decided or made known that he did not want to have his star on the sidewalk, on the floor. So instead, his star is on the wall of this Kodak Theatre, which is nearby, which is in this Hollywood tourist destination. And he requested this for religious reasons. The person is Muhammad Ali. He just didn't want people to be trampling over his name. So I've shared with you this Hollywood Walk of Fame and the whole sort of purpose of it, for people to just be aware of these famous people and celebrities that have made history. Likewise, you have this Hebrews Walk of Fame, or shall I say Hall of Faith. And I'll just go through a list of all these characters as quickly as I can, just so that we don't dwell on this too much, but just to share with you a bit of each of their stories and what you learn about faith. These characters may still come up later on in the episodes to come with my different guests and also in additional episodes for this season. If you're with your Bible, that will be amazing because then you can just read along or sort of skim along the chapter with me. So we've already covered Hebrews chapter 11, verses 1 and 2. Let's jump to verse 4 where we meet our first character in this Hall of Faith. There are two brothers, Cain and Abel, who both offer God a sacrifice. Abel offered God a sacrifice that he required, whilst Cain offered God a sacrifice that was convenient. As a result, Cain kills Abel and we have our first murder in the Bible. Through the character of Abel, we learn that faith responds to God on God's own terms. Next character, number 2, we have Enoch. This he's seen in verse 5. It says, by faith Enoch was taken away so that he did not see death and was not found because God had taken him. For before he was taken, he had his testimony that he pleased God. So here we have Enoch, who exemplifies the persona of a person who has pleased God, which is what we are told in verse 6. Without faith, it is impossible to please him. Enoch didn't experience death, but he fulfilled the purpose for which all of mankind was created for. Number 3, we have Noah. Verse 7. By faith, Noah, being divinely warned of things not yet seen, moved with godly fear, prepared an ark for the saving of his household, by which he condemned the world and became heir of the righteousness which is according to faith. Here we know Noah. Noah decided to build an ark, and in this text it says, divinely warned of things not yet seen. In this place he was warned about the flood, and he couldn't see this flood, but he had to build the ark in faith and in anticipation of what God had told him. And so Noah can't use his 5 senses here. He has to use faith, which is that extra sense that I say that is needed in the spiritual realm. From Noah's story, we learn that real faith acts. It does something. Number 4, we go to Abraham. This is seen in verse 8. By faith, Abraham obeyed when he was called to go out to the place which he would receive an inheritance. And later down in the line, we also know Abraham was asked to sacrifice his only son. And Abraham was willing to do this. This can only be done through faith. Abraham by no means was a perfect man, because he had some times where his faith faltered, but through his story, we still realize and come to learn that real faith obeys. Even though it wasn't completely perfect at the start, Abraham eventually was completely obedient to God's will. I hope you're following me and I'm not going too quickly. The 5th person, we come across our first female in this hall of faith, Sarah. Sarah is married to Abraham, and through her story, she actually laughs at God when God tells her and his promise about what is going to happen or what he wants to do in her life. Her type of faith wasn't a perfect faith, because she laughed in the first instance because she couldn't really believe what God was telling her. And that is found in Genesis chapter 18, verse 9 to 15. She initially laughed about what God had promised her, but then she learned to laugh in faith later on. And here you see that faith comes down to judging that God is faithful and able to keep his promises. And through Sarah's story, you learn that faith must receive God's promises. Although she had passed the age of childbearing and it was humanly impossible for her to give birth and for her to hold her own child in her hands, faith in this instance discredits human logic. God acts above it. And so, for you to have faith here shows that you have to receive this promise, even though it doesn't coincide with what your logic tells you to believe. Now, the next character is a bit of a weird one, because I was a bit surprised when I saw that his name was also in this hall of faith. And in verse 20, we meet Isaac. It says, by faith, Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau concerning things to come. So just to sort of lay the foundation, you've got 2 brothers, Esau and Jacob. Esau is the older and Jacob is the younger one. In Genesis chapter 25, you hear about their story, and they're twins, but their mother, Rebecca, has struggled to conceive, and eventually when she did conceive, the children within her, so that's Jacob and Esau, were fighting with each other. And God said to her, look, you got 2 nations in your womb, 2 people, 2 manner of people shall be separated from you, from your bowels, and the people, one shall be stronger than the other, and the elder will serve the younger one. And when her days to be delivered were fulfilled, there were 2 twins in her womb. So essentially, before Jacob was ever born, God chose to bless him. And their father, Isaac, didn't necessarily want to bless him, because he just wanted the eldest, who was Esau, to be blessed. However, the two children play a trick on their father, and essentially Isaac ends up blessing Jacob as opposed to Esau. And so it's funny that this text in Hebrews 11 chapter 20 says, by faith, Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau concerning things to come. The blessing that their father Isaac laid upon Jacob and Esau, or Jacob specifically, was in accordance to what God wanted, which is quite comical, because this type of faith is not necessarily an active one like we might have seen before, but Isaac had to come to a place of faith when he realized that he had actually blessed Jacob instead of Esau. It says in Genesis chapter 27 verse 33 that he trembled because he realized that he had tried to do something against what God's original plan was, that the eldest will serve the younger son. But like God he thought he would defeat God's plan, but God still had total control at the end of the day. This type of faith is like okay, God, you win. And so in a way, I'd say that is a faith of total surrender. Faith surrenders to God's will. So just to summarize again for Isaac, faith acknowledges that God's plan or will is greater than ours. Number 7 is Jacob. And we see him in verse 21. By faith, Jacob, when he was dying, blessed each of the sons of Joseph and worshipped, leaning on the top of his staff. Here I've written in my notes that faith depends or leans on God. I just like that beautiful imagery of Jacob worshipping and leaning on the top of his staff. Whilst he's dying, he remembers God's greatness, God's goodness, and God holding his future and the future of his descendants. And yeah, it's just sort of that real faith just leans and relies on God and shows that total dependence on him. Moving on to Joseph. By faith, Joseph, when he was dying, made mention of the departure of the children of Israel and gave instructions concerning his bones. This is quite interesting because we know eventually that the children of Israel will leave Egypt. So this is essentially what this text is referring to, the fact that later on, the children of Israel will leave Egypt. So when Joseph died, he wasn't buried initially. His coffin remained above ground for about 400 years before it was then taken back to Canaan. And this is sort of a witness that Israel was going back to the promised land. And that's why he decided that he wasn't going to be buried just yet, which I think is just beautiful. Like even in someone's dying or last days, they still have this faith, which we see being exhibited in this way. Next up, we have Moses' parents. If you're not familiar with the story, they took measures of faith to preserve or save Moses' life from immediate danger when Pharaoh was killing all the sons of the Israelites. They decided to put him in this basket on the river and just let him float, knowing that God will preserve him and keep him and not allow him to die. And essentially that is what happens. God saves Moses in this basket. So from Moses' parents, I learned that faith takes bold steps. And of course, the next character follows on quite nicely. It's Moses. Moses showed faith when he let God lead his destiny instead of allowing Pharaoh or his ambitions lead his destiny. Of course, he grew up in the palace with Pharaoh's daughter and in that sort of environment. But when he realized who he was and that he had this calling on his life, he decided to walk boldly in it. And so here, Moses' faith shows that faith allows God to lead and also real faith obeys once again. Next, we have the nation of Israel. I know this is not just one person, it's a body of people. You have this nation of Israel who have been held captive in Egypt, and they've got their leader, Moses, who by God's instruction leads them out of Egypt. They also exercise faith throughout this exodus, sort of leaving Egypt, this land that they have been captives in. And a very interesting thing is let me go to it. It says, verse 29 of Hebrews 11, by faith they, being the children of Israel, passed through the Red Sea as by dry land, whereas the Egyptians attempting to do so were drowned. Now, the reason why the Israelites were able to walk through the Red Sea on dry land wasn't because they were courageous, it was because they had faith. The Egyptians didn't necessarily have faith in God. The children of Israel, they had faith that God was going to lead them out of Egypt and lead them to this promised land. And so that's why they're able to walk through this Red Sea on dry land. I wonder what the case or what the story would be if they did not have faith and decide to start walking through this Red Sea. I guess they wouldn't have been able to make it to the other side. From that, you learn that real faith is more than just having courage. We also then have in verse 30, my Bible actually says, by faith they overcame. So I'll read verse 30 onwards. By faith, the walls of Jericho fell down after they were encircled for 7 days. If you don't know about this story, about the walls of Jericho falling down, you need to go and study this part of the Bible. It is just such a beautiful story. It's a beautiful narrative. It's a beautiful event that happened and exemplifies why faith is important. So the children of God were instructed that in order for them to defeat Jericho, they had to walk around the walls for 7 days, and on the 7th day walk around 7 days whilst blowing their trumpet. And after they had encircled the walls of Jericho for the 7th time, on the 7th day, the walls of Jericho came tumbling down. There are a few different types of faith that is exemplified in this account. Their faith was daring. They already crossed Jordan, and so there was no turning back. They had to keep going forward. Their faith was obedient. They didn't understand what God was doing, or like if God just told me to walk around some walls of Jericho and say, yeah, that's how they're going to be able to defeat the people living within the city, I would be like, huh? How does that make sense? Like, I know a lot of us will be questioning and asking God, like, no, but like, are we not meant to get our weapons? Are we not meant to get this? What do you mean we're going to be walking around and marching around the gates? What do you mean we're going to just be blowing our trumpets? Like, this doesn't seem like a good battle plan. But no, real faith is obedient. And you can see this in the account of the children of Israel at Jericho. They obeyed nonetheless. Even though it sounded strange and weird, they obeyed God. Real faith here is also patient. They had to keep going round for those whole 7 days. They have to keep marching. If they decided to stop at 5 days, or if they stopped at 6 days, or didn't do the 7 rounds on the 7th day, as God had commanded them, they wouldn't have been able to have the victory that they had on that 7th day when the walls came down. Lastly, the faith that they demonstrated was anticipatory. They knew that God will act on the 7th day when they shouted. And that was something that I'd say kept them going. They anticipated God's move and God's action, which was essentially the walls of Jericho falling down. So this account of the Battle of Jericho can be read in Joshua 6 verses 1 to 27. I hope that will be an interesting read for you all to just see these types of faith: a daring faith, an obedient faith, patient faith, and an anticipatory faith. Next up, we have another female in this hall of faith, Rahab. Rahab is actually a prostitute, and she is here in this hall of faith, which is so strange because you're wondering, how can someone who has a job of being a prostitute be in this hall of faith? But she's right there in verse 31. By faith, the harlot Rahab did not perish with those who did not believe when she had received the spies with peace. I'll take you to her story in Joshua chapter 2. In Joshua chapter 2, you have some spies that have come out to spy the land of Jericho before the nation of Israel encircle it and eventually overcome it. So these spies came and lodged at the house of Rahab, this prostitute, and she actually kept them safe and made sure when the men came to pursue these spies, she hid them and didn't say that they were there. In Joshua chapter 2 verse 8, I'll read. Now before they lay down, she came up to them on the roof and said to them, I know that the Lord has given you the land, that the terror of you has fallen on us, and that all the inhabitants of the land are faint-hearted because of you. For we have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea for you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to the 2 kings of the Amorites who were on the other side of the Jordan, Sihon and Og, whom you utterly destroyed. Verse 11. And as soon as we heard these things, our hearts melted. Neither did there remain any more courage in anyone because of you. For the Lord your God, he is God in heaven above and on earth beneath. Here you have a declaration from Rahab, proving her faith and her trust in God. Remember, remember earlier on I said faith is having trust or confidence in someone or something. That verse in Joshua chapter 2 verse 11 is a proof of Rahab's faith. The fact that she had trust in God and she was willing to identify with his people despite the cost that it would have to her. So in Rahab's case, her faith was proven in her words and also in the actions that she demonstrated. And so we carry on through this hall of faith, and the writer gets to a section in verse 32. He says, "What more shall I say? For the time would fail me to tell of Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, and also of David and Samuel and the prophets." So here we have a group of men who are known as the heroes of faith. You can find a lot of their stories in Judges, in the book of Judges. These men of faith had noticeable failures in their lives in different areas of their life, but somehow still ended up on this hall of faith. You've got Gideon, who God used, but he still had elements where he doubted God's word. You have a man called Barak, who had victory over the Canaanites, but initially he hesitated about God's ability to grant him victory. Then you have Samson, one of my favorite characters, who had been set apart from when he was a young guy or from when he was a baby even, to be this judge, to be powerful and to be strong and to help the children of God. However, he got misled. He sort of lost his way along the line. And even though he was able to defeat the Philistines and do such a great thing in this last moment of faith, he still wasn't able to live up to his full potential because of the mistakes that he made, mainly being yoked or being married to this enemy, as you want to call it. He was married to essentially someone who God had not prepared or purposed for him to be married to. As you may be familiar with Samson and Delilah's story and how she tricked him and eventually led to his overall downfall. Then you have Jephthah. This is a funny story. He's in Judges 11. He was able to defeat the Ammonites, and that was a success. But prior to that, he made a vow, and this vow was such a foolish vow. We'll talk about vows later on. I'm not sure when it will come into when it will be needed, but he made a vow that if God helps him to defeat the Ammonites, he's going to sacrifice the first thing that he sees. And so it turns out that the first thing he sees as he's celebrating is his daughter. And so he has to go ahead with this vow and sacrifice or kill his daughter. And he had a faith that he will be able to defeat the Ammonites, but he still made this foolish vow, which shows that his faith was not necessarily 100%, and he still had elements of weakness. But it's still fine. He's here in the Hall of Faith. We have David, a remarkable man in the Bible, like a man that we are told to be a man after God's own heart. But he failed. He had failures as well. In terms, he slept with a married woman, Bathsheba, and he had issues with his own children as well. And so once again, you see David wasn't necessarily an amazing man or faultless, but he's still here in the Hall of Faith. And now I'm going to skip to Hebrews chapter 11, verses 39 to 40, and I'm going to read in the Message version of the Bible. Not one of these people, even though their lives of faith were exemplary, got their hands on what was promised. God had a better plan for us, that their faith and our faith would come together to make one completed whole. Their lives of faith not complete apart from ours. What is this text talking about? So essentially, this text is saying that even though these people lived an amazing life filled with faith, they weren't able to get their hands on what was promised. So all that they did was in anticipation. They still never got to really grasp this future, this promise that God had given them. They never got to see Jesus. And so you can say that their faith was in anticipation of the cross. And then we are on the other side. in our faith, we are reminiscent about the cross and what has already happened. We are privileged to be able to hear and enjoy about God's love and what that led him to do, which was sending his son to be the sacrifice on the cross. And we are so privileged to hear about what Jesus did whilst he was here on earth. Jesus' work on our behalf gives us more reason to then hold on so tightly to our faith and not let things like discouragement and how tough life here on earth could be defeat us and stop us from continuing on in faith. It's almost like a relay race. They've all started, they meaning all the people in the Hall of Faith. They started this race of faith and they were running. A few of them, they died along the way. They never really got to see this promise that God had for them. And now they've handed the baton onto us. And it's our duty now to carry on running this race of life and endure right till the end. The heroes of faith in the Bible started a race, and we also have this race in front of us to finish. As you're already aware, the Undiluted Word aims to make biblical truths relevant for our 21st century listeners, readers. Like, it's essentially just to make the Bible relevant to us today, because it is relevant to us today. It's not just for us to know about these things that happened in the past, but it's also to inform the decisions that we make today as citizens in the 21st century. So the guests that I've brought along in the upcoming episodes will share their stories and their journey through faith, how they have run this race, and essentially give us hope and encouragement as well as we continue to run this race of faith. So once again, I'm praying that this season will be a blessing to all of us and we'll all be able to learn more about what faith is and how we can continue to demonstrate faith in our day-to-day lives. So my prayer is that we are able to run this race of faith right up until the end, where we are able to see this substance of things that we have hoped for. And I'm sure you'll agree that when Hebrews 11 verse 1 says faith is the substance of things hoped for, the main thing we are hoping for is that soon coming of God when Jesus comes again, his second coming onto the earth, where we'll be caught up with him and go and spend the rest of our time and eternity with him. So thank you so much for listening to this episode, which was a walk through the hall. I hope this although it has been quite quick and fast paced, I hope it has given you an overall understanding into this hall of faith and what we aim to explore more in the upcoming episodes. The next time you hear my voice, I'll be joined with one of my amazing guests and heroes of faith. Make sure you continue listening to previous episodes of the Undiluted Word podcast if you haven't caught up already. What are you doing? And also read up on the blog posts that are available on theundilutedword.com. Also, follow us on Instagram, _, for more snippets, maybe some behind the scenes footage and just more involvement into this season. My aim is for it to be quite interactive and relevant to you. So if you do have any suggestions or things you want to hear about, then please, by all means, get in touch with me so that I can try and make it happen by God's grace. So yeah, till you hear from me and my lovely heroes of faith, stay blessed and bye-bye.